Hey fellow photographer, how's it going? I'm Michael Zelbel. Today's video is all about composing in 3 layers. So these are photos where you have a blurry foreground and a sharp middle ground where the model is living, and then a blurry background again. Composing in layers is a great skill to have as a portrait photographer, and that's why I would like to look into that today. If you are outdoors in a park or in a garden, then you could, for example, use some tree branches in the foreground. You make them blurry, and then there you've got your blurry foreground. You've got your model somewhere in the middle, and then in the background you've got other trees or other tree branches, and they should be blurry again. Let's, for example, say you've got some beautiful white cherry blossoms for the foreground and for the background. It's all white, and your model is wearing a beautiful white dress, and she got beautiful white hair and she got pale skin, and you already notice it's all white, which is cool, but this means you don't have any color contrast going on. So there it's absolutely necessary that you've got this contrast and sharpness, that the foreground is blurry and then the model is sharp and the background is blurry again, because otherwise there's no contrast. Otherwise it would all melt together into one blurry white mess, and you don't want that. How do you make sure that you've got the right contrast and sharpness between the sharp model and the blurry foreground and background? Well, first of all, you set up the scene so that there's enough space between everything. There has to be at least 1 meter or 3 feet between the branches in the foreground, which should be blurry, and your model, which should be sharp. And then there should be another 1 meter or more, 3 feet or more between the model and the trees or the branches in the background, which should be blurry again. Then also you shoot with an aperture of f2.8 if you have a full frame camera, or you choose something like f2 or f1.8 if you've got a crop sensor. This will provide you with just enough sharpness so that the model is sharp from front until her back, let's say, but it provides you with enough blurriness in the fore and background. So don't shoot with a small aperture like f11, which has too much sharpness in the foreground and in the background. Also, don't shoot with a super open aperture like f1.4, because f1.4 on a full frame camera, this would provide you with such a small depth of field so that, let's say, the eyes or the front of your model are sharp, but her backside is already blurry, and then there is not enough contrast, and her backside is melting into the blurry branches in the background, and then it's not clear where the contours of your model are. So go for f2.8, and let's keep at least 1 meter distance between any kind of fore and background and your model. If you are a techie, then you know there's an app for that, right? There's an app for calculating the depth of field. Of course, there's a bunch of apps. I'm using the simple depth of field calculator in this example. When I'm putting in that I'm shooting with an aperture of f2.8 on a full frame camera, and I'm shooting with about 50 millimeters of focal length, and I'm about 2 meters away with my camera from the model, then the calculator does tell me that the depth of field is round about 26 centimeters. So there's 26 centimeters of reasonably sharpness, which is enough to get the model sharp, and it's also small enough so that I know the foreground and the background will be reasonably blurry. Like always, I'm using a flash in order to make my model standing out from the surroundings, especially when photographing outdoors. And the light modifier that I'm using today is a lunar folding beauty dish. I'm using that particularly because it is big enough to make the light reasonably soft, so it's going to be beautiful, but it's also small enough so that the light is halfway believable outdoors. If I would use a huge box, then the light would be so soft that you couldn't believe it, and it's looking like Photoshop. And also this beauty dish, this folding beauty dish, it's very sturdy, so outdoors it can even fall down and it doesn't harm the box so much, and it's very light. It will not tip over very easily. So all in all, this is my favorite modifier for shooting outside. I'm setting up my light source so that it's angled downwards to the model and it's coming a little bit from the side. All of that makes the light more beautiful. But one aspect that is also important in this kind of setup is that the light source is hitting the branches which are in the foreground also at least a little bit, because otherwise these branches will be underexposed and then they look like a kind of dirty, dark, washed out object in the frame, and I don't want that. So they should be light as well, which means the light from the flash has to hit the branches in the foreground even though they are blurry, and then has to hit the model without throwing shadows on the model. But this is a given because it's angled from down, from top to down. So all the shadows that might appear, they are falling down and they are falling outside of my frame. Today's lighting setup is a one light setup, but it's a little bit more complicated than other setups. We've got our model and she is standing in front of some trees with branches in the background, and there are also some branches in the foreground. Then we have the sun, which is shining into the model's back, so we've got nice rim lighting going on. Then we've got our light source, the beauty dish. It's shining along the branches in the foreground into our model, so that both is illuminated, the foreground branches and the model. Naturally, there will also be some light falling into the background, but we don't care about that all that much. The camera settings are f2.8, like discussed, for relatively shallow depth of field, but enough to render the model sharp. Then it's ISO 100, because we want to make the camera as unsensitive as possible in such a bright environment like outdoors. And we have to go to 1/1000th of a second shutter speed in order to have the ambient around the model correctly exposed. We expose for the ambient, not for the model. The model would actually be underexposed, but that's where our light source, our flash, is kicking in. It's set to 1/8 of its power. I'm using the Indra 360 portable studio light. So that means the flash has got 360 watt-seconds of power, and I'm shooting it at 1/8, which means 40 watt-seconds of power. Again, not much, but enough to kiss the model with a little bit of light so that she is coming out. One thing that I would like to highlight is that at a fast shutter speed, a short shutter speed, like 1/1000th of a second, like in this example, you need to activate high-speed sync on your flash trigger in order to make it possible for the camera and the flash to sync. So the trigger and the flash, they also have to support high-speed sync. In my case, if I don't activate high-speed sync on the trigger, then the camera wouldn't even let me choose a fast shutter speed. It would default back to its fastest sync speed, which is a 250th of a second. But at a 250th of a second, the whole scene is too bright. Everything would be burning out. So I go faster, a 1/1000th of a second, but that means I have to activate high-speed sync. Otherwise, that couldn't possibly work. If you are still practicing with exposure values and flash photography and depth of field and this kind of things, I strongly suggest that you try out the setup before you actually shoot it with a real model. So go out into a park or a garden and find a spot where you've got some branches in the foreground, some trees in the background. Check at what time of the day the sun would be in your model's back so that there's a nice rim light going on, and then practice it with a test model. Yeah, right, you can purchase a test model for less than 10 bucks at IKEA, and it's a very, very patient one. You can shoot a lot of photos which look horrible, and your test model doesn't mind at all. And once you have your settings under control, once you know where to shoot and when to shoot and so on, then go there with your real model, and within a few photos you have some very beautiful exposures going on. For that, like always, I wish you a lot of fun, and I wish you good light.